Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about a prominent farm leader writing a letter to the Chief Justice of India. We also talk about the upcoming UP Assembly elections. But first, we talk about the state of tribunals in India. Over the past several years, tribunals in India have faced the problem of vacancies not being filled. Tribunals are quasi-judicial bodies that settle matters related to tax and administrative disputes or even those related to the environment. And right now, there is a standoff going on between the centre and the Supreme Court regarding their vacancies. Plus, the Supreme Court is also not happy about the Tribunals Reforms Act 2021 that was passed in the Rajya Sabha early last month. While criticizing the act and the vacancies on Monday, Chief Justice N.V. Ramana told the centre that it is testing their patience and that it is clear that the centre does not respect the judgment of the court. In this segment, we talk to Apurva Vishwanath, who reports on law for the Indian Express, about the standoff and why the Supreme Court has been criticizing the centre. So, Apurva, before we talk about this sort of standoff between the centre and the Supreme Court over tribunals, could you first explain what exactly tribunals are?
Tribunals are essentially judicial forums. They're quasi-judicial forums as we know it. So we say quasi because there's a mix of judicial experience and technical experience. So they are specialized forums for dealing with cases related to a particular area of law. For example, you have the National Green Tribunal, which only looks at cases relating to the environment, where you would need a fair bit of technical experience about the environment, coupling that with a rights-based system, which you get from judicial experience. So the NGT, for example, has technical members as well as former judges who head and run the tribunal.
Right, and I think they were first set in place in an effort to take some load off courts and to help ensure speedy justice, right?
So the other aspect of tribunals is because high courts or Supreme Court, the regular courts as we understand, because these certain set of cases require a special expertise. These cases are not decided sooner, and that adds to the rising number of cases. So at some point, the courts decided that if you create a specialized body which will only look at these sort of cases, that will help pendency of these cases, and that will also help in better resolution of these issues. For example, the Income Tax Tribunal. The Income Tax Appellate Tribunal, if it's only looking at appeals related to income tax, because they're a specialized body, they are able to dispose these cases faster than an average civil court would be.
Okay, so for some time now, we understand that several of these tribunals in the country, they've had vacancies. And this is something that the Supreme Court has expressed annoyance and frustration about. What is the reason that a number of these positions in tribunals remain vacant?
So one of the big aspects of filling up posts in tribunals, the fundamental problem which this government has spoken about time and again. In fact, the late Union Minister Arun Jaitley mentioned it in the Parliament famously. They said that tribunals are a haven of post-retirement jobs for judges. Most tribunals require someone who has been a former judge of a high court or Supreme Court to head these forums. For example, till the recent amendment took place, the National Human Rights Commission required that its chairperson be a former Chief Justice of India. So this created a problem in finding the right people to head these forums. But the other aspect of it has just also been executive delay in these issues. So the Supreme Court, at least in the last few hearings, has pointed out that a number of recommendations sent by the Supreme Court judges have just been lying with the government without any progress. So the court is blaming the executive for delay, and that's something the reasons are being deliberated in court, and there is no particular reason as such. If you take, for example, information commissioners, for the case of Maharashtra, the Supreme Court has actually set deadlines of 4 weeks to finally finish the process and file an action taken report to the Supreme Court. And this appointment process even began at the behest of the Supreme Court, when civil society groups went to the court, sort of demanded the appointment of information commissioners because just the increase in the number of applications that were pending in these forums. So this has been an issue for the last few years at least.
Yeah, and on Monday, the Supreme Court criticized the government for this. And along with it, it also criticized the centre for recently passing the Tribunals Reforms Act 2021, which was passed in the Rajya Sabha early last month. And one of the things that this act did was that it abolished at least 7 appellate tribunals. And besides that, it also changed the criteria based on which members of a tribunal are selected. So could you talk about how that aspect of the act sort of adds to this existing problem of vacancies?
Right. One is, of course, the existing problem of vacancies, which are rendering a lot of these tribunals almost dysfunctional. The word that the Chief Justice of India used was that the government is emasculating these tribunals. While vacancies are a big problem, that the other issue that the judiciary and executive are sort of fighting it out in court is of the terms of appointment and the process of appointment of tribunal members. So this is an area which the government has sought to sort of regulate, bring in some reform there. So for one, the government has set tenure, age criteria, and also a search and selection committee for appointments to these tribunals. And one of the things that it does is it takes away veto or a first vote that a chief justice of a high court would have for a lot of these state tribunal appointments. That's something that is being seen as encroaching into the powers of the judiciary, of the chief justice of a high court to nominate a particular member. But the other aspect is also this provides a removal process as well. That is also problematic because it's a question of judicial independence. If a member of the tribunal knows that he can be removed on the recommendation of the select committee, of course, but by the executive for whatever reason. So that is also a question of judicial independence, which the court has been looking into.
So just to recap, the Tribunals Reforms Act 2021 takes away the veto power away from a chief justice for the appointments in the state tribunals. Plus, the Act provides a removal process for the members of the tribunal, something that raises concerns regarding the judicial independence of tribunals. But Apurva points out that the main problem is that in the past, the Supreme Court has already delivered 3 judgments on these exact same questions, in which the court outlined how the functioning of these tribunals should be.
So this 2021 amendment runs contrary to a number of decisions that the court took in those judgments. So if Supreme Court judgments are law of the land and they cannot be undone merely because the government wants to do so. So of course, the only way to upturn a Supreme Court decision, quote unquote, is that you have to remove the basis, the defect on which the Supreme Court sort of decided against the law. But without doing that, for example, if the court said, we will strike this down because it affects judicial independence, then you have to find a way to say that the next law doesn't impinge on judicial independence. You can't just undo a Supreme Court law by saying that there is parliamentary supremacy. So this has really been the issue between the executive and the judiciary. If you see, the Supreme Court has been saying that there is no sanctity of a Supreme Court judgment. How can the government enact the law? And that too, the manner in which the law was passed in the parliament is also something that the Chief Justice of India has spoken about separately, not in court, but in a public function. He has said that in all of 20 minutes, without any discussion, the law has been passed in the parliament. Did the parliament really consider whether they are deliberately undoing a Supreme Court judgment? Did they consider any of the issues that the Supreme Court judgment raised? One, for example, is the age criteria. The Tribunals Reforms Amendment sets minimum age of 50 years for someone to be appointed as a tribunal member. So the court earlier has questioned this 50-year rule because it's why 50? That's an arbitrary number is something that the court has said. And there is a strong opposition from the bar where you can set educational qualifications or professional qualifications, say that member of the bar must have a professional experience of X number of years. But a minimum age criteria that is in a way closer to the date of retirement, that is 62 years, than otherwise. That's something that the court had questioned earlier. But the fact that the government brought back a number of these provisions without really looking into what the court said has been now a new tug of war between the executive and the judiciary in court.
Okay, so the centre not filling these vacancies and plus bringing in a new act that makes it tougher for these vacancies to get filled. What could be the possible reasons that the government, may want to delay these vacancies getting filled?
So for one, like I said, the project of rationalizing of tribunals, as the government has called it, goes back to about 4 or 5 years ago. So in this Tribunals Reforms Amendment, the government has once again abolished about 7 tribunals. So including the appellate forum for the censor board. So the government says that it is a policy decision and a number of these tribunals are anyway redundant and cases are just piling up over there. And it would make sense to have them in a high court or any other judicial forum or merge a couple of tribunals instead of just having more number of tribunals. That's something that the government has argued. So the government's point of view is that there is a need to rationalize tribunals, regulate the functioning of tribunals, because the government says, A, there is an accountability issue with these tribunals. They set their own rules, most of these tribunals, and sometimes there are bad decisions, and when it goes to appeal in the High Court, so Supreme Court, for example, it takes a long time for something to be corrected. That is one. And the second thing is, like I said earlier, that this government has always argued that the post of a tribunal member is something that is looked at as a lucrative post-retirement job for a lot of judges. However, that hasn't stopped the government from appointing a lot of judges as members of these tribunals. That's something that this government has continued to do. One of the other important things about the tribunal reforms is that much of the opposition to a lot of what the government is doing has come from the bar itself. For example, the landmark case in this aspect is also something that's been brought by the Madras Bar Association. So lawyers across the country who form the talent pool essentially for either the courts to pick or the executive to pick from to make these appointments in tribunals. The stakeholders have had a big issue with a lot of these reforms that the government has brought in. So which raises the question as to whether these are well thought out reforms, or even when the Supreme Court has struck down many of them, that the government is so persistent about pushing this reform agenda.
And next we talk about the farmers' protests that have been going on for over 9 months now, in which farmers mainly from Punjab, Haryana and UP have been demanding that the central government's 3 controversial farm laws should be repealed. Yesterday, a prominent farm leader, Anil Ghanwat, who was part of the 3-member committee appointed by the Supreme Court, wrote a letter to the Chief Justice of India demanding that the report and recommendations that were submitted by the committee should be made public. Now, to understand what this report is about, we need to talk about what happened back in January. During that time, a bunch of petitions were filed in the Supreme Court regarding the farm laws and the protests around them. In response to these petitions, one of the things that the Supreme Court had done was that it had appointed a committee. In this segment, Parthasarthi Biswas, who reports on agriculture for the Indian Express, joins us to talk about it.
On 12th January, the then Chief Justice of India, Justice Bobde, while hearing a clutch of petitions challenging the farm laws, had announced the formation of a 4-member committee, which included agriculture economics Ashok Gulati, P.K. Joshi, and farmer leaders Anil Ghanwat from Maharashtra, and Bhupinder Singh Maan, the president of BKU, Bharatiya Kisan Union. Bhupinder Singh Maan had recused himself from the committee. While announcing the formation of the committee, Justice Bobde had said this committee is going to act as the bridge between the protesting farmers and the government, try to come to a golden mid regarding the farm laws. They were to hear and record the suggestion of objections and everything else about the farm laws from various stakeholders. As I mentioned, Mr. Maan had recused himself from the committee, and these 3 people, the 3-member committee, had gone on to do what the Supreme Court had directed. Interestingly, Justice Bobde had stopped the implementation, had stayed the implementation of the 3 laws till the further time.
This decision to stay the laws was unprecedented. This was the first time that the court, without having a single hearing, had stayed the laws in an interim order. Parthasarthi now talks about what the committee was instructed to do.
The 3-member committee was given 2 months to submit its reports. And since the formation, the committee had consulted with numerous farmer leaders, farmer producer organizations. Then they had also talked to exporters, importers, agricultural scientists, agricultural economists, farmer organizations from the length and breadth of the country. And they submitted that report in March, on 19th of March, which was well within the stipulated 2 months' time. Since then, the Supreme Court has a new Chief Justice, but somehow this case has not come up for hearing anymore. Supreme Court had mandated the report be submitted to it in a sealed envelope. That means the report has not been made public. And since 5 months have passed, the report lies with the Supreme Court in a sealed envelope, and the protests, as you know, are still continuing.
Now, this is the report that Anil Ghanwat, who was part of the committee, wants to make public. This is the reason he has now written a letter to N.V. Ramana, the Chief Justice of India. Ghanwat interestingly also heads a farmer union named Shetkari Sangatana.
In his letter, he has urged and pleaded with the Chief Justice of India to make this report public. He says, as a farmer leader, he is pained. He is pained that the farmers' agitation is continuing for 9 months with no end in sight. His letter, which I quote now, says, as a member of the committee, especially representing the farmers' community, I am pained that the issue raised by the farmers are not yet resolved and the agitation is continuing. I feel that the report has not been given any attention by the Honorable Supreme Court. I am humbly pleading to the Honorable Supreme Court to kindly release the report for implementations of its recommendations for peaceful resolution of the stalemate of the farmer and to the farmer's satisfaction at the earliest.
Parthasarthi says that the timing of the letter is interesting, considering the farmers' protests have only recently become prominent again.
As we speak now on Tuesday, the farmer leaders are marching towards the district administrative headquarters in Karnal. Also, we had the Mahapanchayat in Muzaffarnagar, where the farmer leaders gave a clarion call to oust BJP because they are not staying the farm laws. A lot of politics has happened.
Though when he asked Ghanwat whether the incident in Karnal or Muzaffarnagar was the trigger to the letter, he said no.
He said he is, as a farmers leader and especially as a leader of the organization which was founded by the legendary leader Sharad Joshi, he is very disturbed at the ongoing agitation. The ongoing agitation, Ghanwat claims, is by farmers who have not read the laws or who have only half-baked information about it. And they are fed by their leaders who want the agitation to continue for their own wishes. Ghanwat goes on to say, if the ongoing agitation is not resolved at the earliest, it can lead to very serious law and order situation for the country.
Ghanwat in his letter claims that the committee has done a very thorough job. He says they have spoken to each and every stakeholder and that they believe the committee's report is very complete in itself.
Once the report comes in public domain, Ghanwat says the agitation or the question about the 3 farm laws can proceed to the next level and from there can come to a reasonable end. His main contention is that whatever suggestions they have made has come from their deliberation with everyone. Each and every second of the deliberation has been video recorded so that people cannot go backtrack on their statements later on.
He says that they have spoken to farmer producer companies, exporters, importers, agricultural commodity experts, economists, dairy farmers, poultry farmers, and every other stakeholder.
And he says that it is necessary that this is being made public. If this is being made public, the ongoing agitation, he claims, would come to a halt, and the whole question about whether the 3 laws should be implemented as they are or whether there should be amendments in it, or whether certain things have to be removed from them will be taken care of, and that's how the farmers' agitation would come to an end. So this is the reason he said he has written this letter to the Honorable Chief Justice.
Meanwhile, talking about the current status of the farm laws in the country, Parthasarthi says that right now, majority of the opposition-ruled states have either stayed the central laws or have formed their own. But what would happen if the centre's farm laws come into effect later? He says that this is something that will be a point of contention and will be argued in the courts.
Now, agriculture being a state subject, agricultural marketing is a complete state subject. So, of the 3 laws, the law which talks about a mandis, that is the APMCs, many states feel that it is encroachment by the centre on their sphere of legislation. So, Maharashtra, they have amended that law. They have also amended the Essential Commodities Amendment Law and the other third law and made the changes that are. Now, if the Supreme Court decides that these three laws are good to go, whether those laws will come into effect or the state laws will come into effect would be a question best answered by the lawyers and the constitutional experts.
Now, the other question to consider is how will the farmers' agitation affect the elections in UP that are scheduled for next year? Parthasarthi says that this is a question that is on everyone's mind right now and is worrying many politicians.
The farmer leaders have not hidden their anti-BJP stance to it. Tikayat and other farmer leaders have talked about not voting for BJP, especially Western UP. The cane growers and other farmer leaders are very much against the laws. Even in Punjab, which goes to poll later, this is a very big issue. Haryana, we have seen the farmer leaders clashing with the police, with the government on many issues. Chief Minister, the Deputy Chief Minister have been on different pages about this ongoing issue. So yes, to a lay observer, it would have a political effect. The farmer leaders are trying to ensure that the BJP does not gain in Western UP or in Punjab or in Haryana, but whether that will happen or not is a different thing altogether. But if you talk to the farmer leaders, from Western UP, from Punjab, they feel that they have been able to capture the mood of the people and they feel that BJP would lose politically in the upcoming elections, at least from Western UP and in Punjab.
And in the end, we talk about some announcements regarding the UP Assembly elections. The AIMIM chief Asaduddin Owaisi yesterday kick-started his party's campaign for the 2022 UP polls from the Ayodhya district by saying that his party's aim is to establish a political leadership that represents Muslim interests in the state as well. Addressing a poll rally, Owaisi said that AIMIM will fight the elections with full strength and that his party has become stronger in the state in the past 5 years. He further said that the Muslim community has not had a political leadership or voice in UP so far. On a possible alliance with the Samajwadi Party, Owaisi said that if Akhilesh Yadav is ready to talk, he will engage in a conversation. Owaisi also asserted that his party's objective is to defeat the BJP. Meanwhile, Bahujan Samaj Party President Mayawati yesterday, while giving a call for foraging Dalit Brahmin unity to bring her party back in power in the state, accused the BJP and the Samajwadi Party of making tall claims but doing nothing on the ground. Mayawati also took pot shots at the Congress for communal riots in Meerut and Muzaffarnagar when it was in power at the centre and blamed the party for not giving protection to the minorities. Further, extending her support to the farmers' protests against the farm laws, Mayawati announced that if her party comes to power, the 3 controversial laws will not be implemented in the state. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.